Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about all things insulin sensitivity, how it's crucial to proper blood sugar management, ultimately blood pressure too,
Sure.
and overall metabolic health. We're going to talk through how to improve our body's responsiveness to this vital hormone, what it is, what it does, and why it matters. So welcome into the Fasting for Life podcast. If this is your first time listening in, thanks for giving us a shot to become part of your fasting regimen. Welcome to the fasting family. If you want to know more about mine or Tommy's journey and how our lives have been transformed through the tried and true art of fasting, head back to episode 1. Give it a listen. If you're a long-term listener, thank you so much for continuing to support us and telling the podcast gods and goddesses, whoever runs these things, that we are bringing value. It's like a mystical creature. We don't really know. Like, we know some things like downloads and all that, but I don't know. We're doing a good thing. Downloads are going up. People are still listening. So
that's good. It's good.
We appreciate you. So it's like rate, subscribe, review, share, follow, download, whatever the thing is that you do. Ask your child to do it for you, your teenager. But we want to give a shout out to a 5-star review that came through. This is our favorite kind of review, of course.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, we have hundreds and hundreds of them. So
we always need more, though.
We always need more, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough self-aggrandizing here. But let's give a shout out to Hottie Toddy Tar Heel.
Oh, excellent. Love that. I love that username there. She said 50 pounds in 3 months. I started my fasting journey on February of 2024. Listened to your podcast for the first time at the beginning of February. Felt inspired. Love that. Had always struggled with weight. Never could stick to diets because I never saw the results fast enough to be encouraged. And then I started with 16.8, slowly pushed back my lunches by 30 minutes until one day I looked up and it was 4 p.m. And then it was, hey, I didn't want to eat at 4. And then again at 7 for dinner. I thought, I wonder if I could make it to dinner. I made it a lot easier than I thought I would. Lots of water and coffee later. I've been an OMADer, so a 1 meal a dayer, for about 2.5 months now. And I was a 25-year-old, 240-pound man. As of this morning, I'm 190 pounds with a goal of 175. So congratulations for that. Working out, eat lean meat and veggies every night. Compliments at work are pouring in, and my wife could not be happier. Thank you for awakening my eyes. You're welcome. That's so incredibly awesome. Keep up the great work.
Hottie Toddy Tar Heel. You are the reason why we do this podcast week in and week out. So thank you so much for the rating, for the review. Thank you for listening. And I'm just grateful that you found value in what it is that we talk about week in and week out. And hopefully you resonate with our story as well. And that's our goal, is we want to do this for so many other people. So share if you want to. If you've got there's another review here that was mentioning the marriage merge where, hey, my husband needs, I'm trying to get my hubby on board because I'm doing it and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
So I've been sending him your podcast. I've been listening, accidentally leaving it on when we get in the car to go on a road trip, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
whoops, how'd that get on?
Yeah, right. Whoopsie. So we're just grateful for you guys listening in. So let's get into today's conversation, Tommy, on how to improve insulin sensitivity. So we talk a lot about insulin resistance, right? Mm-hmm. So insulin resistance is what I found that I had that was making my journey so much more difficult, even when doing all of the right things to Hottie Toddy Tar Heel, trying all of the stuff, didn't have the motivation because the results wouldn't come. I'd get impatient and my old habits or lifestyle would, rear its evil head and I'd fall backwards. So insulin resistance is what makes it harder for the energy that you eat from food to get into your cells to be used as energy, right? So insulin sensitivity is the opposite of the resistance. Insulin sensitivity is the key to maintaining a healthy, stable blood sugar level and optimizing our metabolic health. So, the more sensitive or responsive our cells are to insulin, the more efficiently the insulin hormone can transport excess energy from the bloodstream. Now, we'll talk about the different things that can improve or undermine insulin sensitivity. And it's not just food, but things that can move the energy that's in our bloodstream into the cells where it can be immediately used for energy and not just stored as fat, ultimately getting us stuck in this vicious cycle of trying harder and harder to lose weight, and the scale just budges less and less and the frustration mounts. So, habits that support healthy blood glucose and also support insulin sensitivity, we're going to walk through what those are and really just unpacking insulin sensitivity in terms of some clinical application and just a basic overview of what it does in the body. So then we can have the conversation of the lifestyle changes that we make, how we're going to have the understanding of why it's making a difference. And it's going to make us more likely to do those things when we understand the why behind it.
Yeah, because insulin is an important driver for so many biochemical processes in the body that what we have to understand is that when we ingest any food or drink besides just plain water, really, we're going to have some level of an insulin response, and so there is a need for insulin. It's vital, and it's absolutely it's a good thing. It's just that when we start producing and needing to excrete more and more and more of it for a given ingestion food load, then that becomes very, very problematic, because then the nutrients that we just brought in, the calories, the fuel that we just brought in, they can't get shuttled over into being utilized by our muscle cells and every other cell in our body. They more likely get shuttled over into fat storage. And that's the problem, because insulin actually drives that storage part of the biochemical process. So the more insulin we have, the more likely we are to store any given fuel that we bring in. And this also is a driving factor for why, when as the weight comes on, as we get more and more excess fat stored, then it can become harder and harder to actually burn through the fat storage, because it creates a bit of a vicious cycle there with needing more insulin per given food load, and then that locking up more of the fuel in long-term fat stores, which is exactly what we're trying to prevent or undo or reverse over time, right?
Yeah, and that has to do with the concept of that, when we're talking about this blood sugar spike insulin response. And Dr. Ben Bickman says it: when the process is excessively activated, repeated glucose spikes from eating sugary foods, carbohydrates, large, hedonic meals. When that's repeated, insulin surges are needed to clear the glucose. The body will often dampen its response to reduce the activation. So you're stuck in this catch-22.
Yeah.
Right. So think of it how caffeine addicts need more caffeine than they used to. The body becomes sensitized to it. Right. So to appreciate what it means, like big picture role of insulin, normally when blood sugar levels rise after eating, there's three, let's say carbohydrates specifically, that has the biggest insulin response.
Okay.
The alcohol as well, probably number two. The pancreas secretes a corresponding amount of insulin, which here's where the action of insulin takes place, where we want to see an increased insulin sensitivity. It's in our muscle cells, our fat cells, and our liver cells, because those are the three places that we can store excess glucose.
Okay.
The problem is that insulin resistance can show up, or a lack of insulin sensitivity, in the muscle cells years before it shows up in the blood sugar level rising, because of this dampening effect that Dr. Bickman was explaining, the caffeine addict scenario. So there's this really big lag. And then our adipose fat cells, there's unlimited storage. And they also become, we're going to do an episode here in the near future on leptin, a new kind of view on leptin. But the adipose fat cells actually become metabolically active cells, proliferating that vicious cycle that you were just talking about. Then we've got our liver, which we've done tons of episodes on non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and elevated liver enzymes. and how your liver isn't able to process the glycogen properly, meaning
Yeah.
that short-term energy store, taking the glucose out of the bloodstream and storing it when it can't be shuttled into the cell and used properly. So you kind of get stuck in this, back and forth, where the pancreas releases enough insulin to compensate for the weak response, right?
Mm.
So the blood sugar remains in a normal range. And this is where I was. But if
Yeah.
that sensitivity continues to decline, then the pancreas can no longer make enough to keep up with the demand that it needs, and the
Mm.
blood glucose will remain chronically elevated. This is where you're going to become one of the 80 million Americans that is an undiagnosed pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
So you're going to be trying to change, you're going to be counting calories, tracking macros, doing the workout plans, eat less, move more, but you're already stuck in the vicious insulin resistant, lack of insulin sensitivity cycle. And it's going to make it that much more likely that you're going to be harder to lose the weight. The weight gain is going to continue, and then you're going to end up with metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, weight gain, cardiovascular disease, NAFLD, PCOS, et cetera, all of these things that we talk about that are directly related to long-term elevated blood sugar or long-term loss of insulin sensitivity.
Yeah, and there's a reason why low carb, particularly ketogenic diets, can work very, very well for some folks, but not necessarily for everybody. And it also has to do with insulin resistance, with the level of insulin resistance, because we want to be clear here that insulin sensitivity and resistance are on a spectrum. It's not just black or white. Am I insulin resistant or not? And that's typically how we hear that question phrased. But it would be better to ask, how much, if you think, or if you have signs and symptoms of insulin resistance, it's more like, how insulin resistant am I? How insulin sensitive am I? It would be better to look at it on a 1 through 10 scale, or maybe a 1 through 100 scale, rather than a yes no scale, because it's definitely on a gradient. Because if you've ever known somebody, or if you yourself have ever had any results on a low carbohydrate diet by restricting carbohydrates, then that can work at a lower level of at some level of insulin resistance. But at a higher level of insulin resistance, even pulling that lever very, very strictly may not work. Even if you are counting calories as well as being very strict with carbohydrate intake as well, it might even take another level, which we can insert fasting here, or even before we get to that point where we can add fasting in as a way to bring insulin levels even lower than we can with just pulling the food lever by itself.
Yeah, and we're going to get into those 5 things. You just mentioned one of the things to increase your insulin sensitivity or decrease your insulin resistance. There's two other things I wanted to mention in regards to the excess fat on the body and this insulin sensitivity spectrum that you just mentioned.
Mm.
Is that the fat cells themselves, you're gonna see this, the excess body fat itself. So it's like, have you ever heard this? You don't want to lose weight too fast, right?
Yes. Mm.
Well, if the fat cells are not only becoming metabolically active tissue that then keeps you stuck, that process happens through the inflammatory molecules, typically TNF alpha and IL-6. Those are then released by the fat cells. Just think of it like chronic low-level inflammation.
Yeah.
So we know that inflammation is the underlying cause of heart disease. We know that inflammation is the number one cause of the itises, gingivitis, arthritis, tendinitis, a lot of the orthopedic conditions that we have that are incredibly lifestyle related.
Yeah.
But these chemicals are going to interfere with the fat breakdown that you're just referencing when you pull the calorie lever or the food lever,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we add in the stress and sleep, which increase the this is the tricky trifecta for what it was for me, the stress hormones and the poor sleep. That cortisol response, the stress hormones themselves will also counter the effect of insulin, which is going to say you need more insulin, right, to get the same response that you used to, which is going to get you stuck in this same vicious cycle of, it's not on or off, black or white, but it's like, how do we pull the layers back or pump the brakes and slow down this process while we give the body some time to heal?
Yeah. And, when we talk about stress and poor sleep, those lead into what happens the next day. Well, we know, we've talked about it before, insulin sensitivity decreases by up to 30% just after one night of poor sleep. And we're talking about 6 hours of sleep, 5.5, 6, even 6.5 hours of sleep, and you have a lower insulin sensitivity than you would have with 7 or 7.5+ hours of sleep. So
Right.
it doesn't take long to actually see that, the very next day. So that means any given food choices I make the next day are having a worse physiological impact, that following day. So it becomes, no wonder I can't feel like I can gain control over the scale right there. And, that process kind of continues. And then inhibitions and all of these kind of things, self-control, all of the decision making that I need to go into the next day are then likely lowered too after that poor night's sleep and higher inflammation.
And if you can't get an insulin blood test, right, a fasting insulin blood test or a carb stimulation insulin blood test, right, then one way to know it, to find out subjectively and kind of be able to track it is you can head to our website, thefastingforlife.com. We have a resource there. It's called the insulin assessment. And on the back of that page, it's you count up the yeses, you give yourself a score, and on the back is a waist circumference ratio and a height to waist ratio metric that will also give you some insight into the potential for insulin resistance or lack of insulin sensitivity. But with that, the good news is that insulin resistance is reversible. And some of the most powerful habits to improve insulin sensitivity are things you may already be doing or you've done in the past. You just haven't done them with the power of fasting combined.
True.
So
great point.
We want to start with that fasting component, right? So the blueprint to fasting for fat loss, it's a 20-page PDF. It's free. You can click the link in our show notes. It will email it over to your inbox. And we talk a lot about this on this podcast. If you're new, time-restricted feeding, time-restricted eating, just big picture, 2023 meta-analysis of 12 studies. Researchers compared the effect of eating early versus eating late. We're talking fasting windows feeding windows between 6 and 10 hours.
Sure.
So we're not even talking like the fasting that we teach, right?
Right.
Whether it was earlier or later, participants tended to experience reductions in body weight, and not just body weight, but more importantly, they saw bigger changes in insulin resistance in the earlier window.
Yeah.
That improved the insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. So you may be not fasting consistently. You're like, where do I start? Go get the blueprint. You are fasting consistently and you're like, well, crap, kind of stuck. Move your window earlier. You're giving your pancreas a break from cranking out the insulin consistently, which is that vicious cycle that we talked about, right? So you were saying it earlier. It drops insulin lower than it has been, and it allows your body to tap into those fat stores and get better at flipping that switch on that spectrum rather than we thinking of it like that black and white on off.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful because no matter how good your food choices are, your macros are, or your calories and how compliant you are with whatever you've calculated out, if you have a calorie deficit even, then there's still going to be there's still only going to be a certain amount of time that you have for those levels to actually drop before the next insulin secretion has to happen because of another eating opportunity. So I remember when I was the most strict with calories and macronutrients, but it was still being recommended to me to eat across 5 or 6 times a day. Well, those are all insulin spikes. Even if they're good food, it still adds up over those hours and across the whole day. So if we can compartmentalize our food choices, it doesn't have to be ultra long, fasting times in order to have a great impact on blood sugar and insulin.
Consistency wins, right? So that's Absolutely. What I just heard there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of the other levers that we can pull and things that you've done or tried in the past. When combined with fasting, you're going to see just an incredible, just like the shout out to Hottie Toddy Tar Heel. Exercise. So when we talk about exercise or food choices or lifestyle adaptation, the last thing we subscribe to is let me give you your plan. Here's what you need to follow, right? It's, well, great. What if you give me a meal plan or shopping list that involves a bunch of vegetables I don't like eating or fish that I don't like eating, then I'm not going to stick with it, right? So when it comes to exercise, resistance training, walking, aerobic exercise, any combination of the two, effectively improve insulin sensitivity and support healthy blood glucose levels.
Yeah.
That's because we're going to be pulling that lever. Remember we talked about where insulin acts in the body, right? Earlier, those 3 places, the liver, the fat cells, and the muscle cells. So when you exercise, your muscles are going to contract. It's going to take the GLUT4 transporters, right? This molecule that shuttles, takes insulin and the glucose into the cell.
Mhm.
It's going to take it from the interior of the muscle to the surface of the membrane, prompting these cells to absorb more glucose from the bloodstream without requiring more insulin from your pancreas.
Okay.
So
Nice.
some research suggests exercise makes cells more insulin sensitive for 24 hours after a workout. So what we do is we go into a workout thinking, yeah, I'm going to work out today. The scale is going to move tomorrow. What we should be thinking is I'm going to work out today because I know it's improving my insulin sensitivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And then not looking for immediate feedback on the scale either, because you might not get it for sure. But you're putting a demand on the muscle cells that are working all throughout the body. So if you can, the more muscle cells you can stimulate, a full body workout would be much more beneficial to insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity than a more isolated kind of muscular workout too.
Right? Keep it simple. So let's put out some numbers here for just a sec. So the more you exercise, the more you'll benefit, right? If you want to go down the exercise rabbit hole for longevity, go listen to Peter Attia.
He's great.
That's what he does, right?
Yeah.
So people engaging in 170 minutes of exercise per week, you're going, holy crap, that's a big number. That's 24 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Right? Over 6 months, improved insulin sensitivity by 85%. While those engaging in 115 minutes per week, right? Whatever 115 divided by 7 is, Tommy, quick math, improved insulin sensitivity by 40%.
20? Yeah.
Is it 20? Seems like it should be less than that. 115 divided by 7.
Is 17? I think it's
17 minutes a day. That's like a quick little full body cycle workout. You don't need all the equipment. You don't need the gym membership, really. And if you're completely sedentary, just start walking. Does exercise count? Does walking count as exercise in most healthy populations? No, because it doesn't increase the heart rate, but it is tapping into your zone 1 and zone 2 for most people that are overweight or sedentary that have some insulin resistance issues. So you're going to get a benefit. But here's the thing.
It puts a demand on so many muscle cells, though, that we see blood sugar dropping over that time, which means we don't have to push out as much insulin if we can get that walk in, especially after we have a meal.
And here's the consistency is studies showing between regular exercise and inconsistent exercise, there were reduced markers of inflammation and improved insulin sensitivity. So there was one study that showed that highly fit people taking 10 days off from exercise led to a decline in insulin sensitivity. Fortunately, it came right back when they went right back to their exercise. So if you miss a couple of days, it's fine. Just stay consistent with it, just like your fasting efforts. And we've seen this in some of the one-on-one coaching clients with the pre-diabetes reversal program. Or the diabetes reversal program is, they'll go out for a walk and their blood sugar will go up. And they're like, bah! I'm like, yes, it's okay.
Sure.
Keep doing it. 3 months later, they go out for a walk and it stays the same, or it actually lowers their blood sugar response post-meal. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. I never thought this was possible.
Well, at a certain level of activity level and insulin resistance, it can be very demanding to where you actually need a little bit more blood sugar.
And it's individualized.
That walk. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is that we're trying to fit all of our, ourselves into the little boxes that we're told we should fit into. Right. And we don't want that. So we mentioned this second thing already. So we talked about exercise, we talked about fasting, eating low carb. So Tommy, you talked about this already. Mm-hmm. We live in an obesogenic food state. We live in a highly processed, highly refined carbohydrate, high hedonic foods, high fat, high carb, easily accessible food environment. Right. Mm-hmm. And the refined carbohydrate piece is really, and sugars, like stuff, just don't drink your calories, right? The stuff that we find in sugary drinks, they're broken down and absorbed more rapidly by the body. So that's going to just literally just put fuel on the fire in terms of proliferating the lack of insulin sensitivity or proliferating the insulin resistance, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same thing with a lot of the processed carbohydrates. So even the ones that you're eating, they can come in so fast, and they're already so refined, so highly processed that there's not really any resistance for what the body needs to do to them in order for them to just go right into the bloodstream, hit the sensors in the pancreas, and then there's no stopping them. It's like the wheels are already greased for those processes.
One thing I want to mention on low carb is we are not no carb, we are low carb. right? Especially if you have insulin resistance or you're trying to reverse metabolic disease,
Mm.
go low carb. It's been shown to increase production of adiponectin, which supports insulin sensitivity and insulin secretion. So both sides of that vicious cycle, right, that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It curbs glucose production by the liver, and it helps prevent visceral fat and lowers inflammation. So
Perfect.
when you think low carb, a lot of people will go to the keto and intermittent fasting. I found keto. We like keto in 90-day increments, very therapeutic, great for diabetes reversal,
Yeah.
hard to sustain. There's a lot of high caloric, high fat bomb type stuff in there, limits your food. So we really, one of the studies that's out there is they showed this adiponectin increase, which is a positive on insulin sensitivity, with diets containing less than 30% of the carbohydrates. So the misconception out there is low carb is like, I'm never going to eat a piece of bread again. I'm
Yeah.
never going to look at rice. I'm not going to eat any carbohydrates, right? We're like, no, let's use some balance here. A lot of the benefit in insulin sensitivity and insulin HOMA-IR and insulin resistance numbers that move in these time-restricted feeding or in these diet studies, they typically use a carbohydrate a level in these studies, a macro breakdown that's more likely, that's more used to the standard American diet. So we're talking 40 to 55% carbs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we still see changes in insulin, but this study specifically with adiponectin found a significant increase with diets containing less than 30% of carbohydrates. That still gives you a lot of life flexibility. We like in the blueprint to fasting for fat loss, that free PDF that we have, we say 20%. But if you go up or down, it's supposed to be sustainable. It's not supposed to be so restrictive that you're like, I'm never going to have ice cream again. Like, come on.
Right. Yeah. And it's giving yourself an opportunity to put in some fruits, some veggies, some different things.
That's the next one.
Some bread here or there. Like, but I don't need three. On my plate. Maybe I just have one and I enjoy it. But at the same time, maybe I also put it at the later part of my meal too, when part of the insulin load has already been determined by my meal. So maybe a little bit of macro timing within my meal, and then plan for my walk. And then if I had a little bit of extra, one day, then I'll plan for a few extra minutes on my walk, and that will help to bring about some of that balance that you just talked about.
So the last thing on the food component is what we were just alluding to there, is making some better choices, right? Some more intentional choices, less refined, less processed stuff. So we want to decrease inflammation, if it's from our visceral fat or if it's from other issues or associated with insulin sensitivity issues. We want to decrease that inflammation. So upgrading your diet, so not just limiting the refined processed carbs, increasing your fiber, plant foods, healthy fats, depending on your lifestyle. I eat more carnivore. My wife likes to eat a salad every day, right? So it depends on what you like, but there's carotenoids, there's polyphenols, olive oil, healthy fats. These reduce oxidative stress, which can precede insulin resistance. That low-level chronic inflammation is how we should just think about it, basically thinking through it. So get rid of the high refined vegetable and seed oils. Not say don't ever eat them, but you're not going to go to a carnivore and indulge in the, just not eat the thing you went there to eat because it's a one time a year thing. Eat it, move on. But day to day, virgin olive oil, avocado oil, fish, walnuts, those types of things, really kind of more of like a Mediterranean style diet. If you're looking for just like kind of a white labeled way to think about it.
That's great.
That's another way to really proliferate, decreasing the inflammation and not preceding that potential insulin sensitivity issue later on down the road.
These are all great points and great recommendations. And the more that you pull these levers that you're talking about right now, they're going to support your next fast. Not only are they going to remove some of those question marks about, well, how should I break my fast? Well, it becomes a lot easier and more intuitive when you're in control of more of the ingredients. If more of your plates are whole foods based rather than the processed ones, you don't have to have as much thought or as much complexity around some of those decisions, which is a beautiful part of the simplification there too.
Yep. And so the last two we're going to talk about today before we wrap up, right? So we're going to talk about these two together because these are non-food related things or non-fat cell related things that will potentially drive a lack of insulin sensitivity or a lack of functioning insulin in your body. proliferating insulin resistance and all the stuff that we've talked about is stress and sleep. And Tommy, I know both for both of us, these were huge, badges of honor that we wore. We can juggle all the things, multiple businesses, family, kids, travel,
Oh, yeah.
as well as, the wearing the badge of honor of now I'll sleep when I'm dead type mentality that my dad my dad modeled for me all those years. So stress, when we're looking at it, that's going to be your stress response, your fight or flight response. It's going to release cortisol and epinephrine. These hormones have blood sugar elevating and insulin suppressing properties. So they elevate your blood sugar, right? Just like when they wake you up in the morning, you're going to have your stress response, your circadian rhythm is going to say, hey, cortisol, let's go, wake you up. You need some energy for the day, okay? But a chronic response is going to keep those numbers, the blood sugar elevated, and suppress the insulin functionality. So the chronic stress response has been associated with an increased risk of insulin resistance. So we have to engage strategically the other half of the autonomic nervous system, right? Because we were just talking about the fight or flight response, which is in the sympathetic nervous system. We need to get into the parasympathetic, which is what you've probably heard it as the rest and digest nervous system. This is going to improve glucose tolerance. And this is where sleeping comes in. Rest, right? Improve glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity. So how do we do that? Well, physical activity, having support of our loved ones in our social circles, mindfulness techniques, deep breathing exercises, stretching, meditation, even going for walks, all of this type of stuff, this like present time consciousness, this awareness piece. You can do vagus nerve, you can do heart math. There's all these different things that you can do. You can journal, listen to music. What else, Tommy?
Well, just feeling in control of some of the decisions that you're making, which may have to do with what you put on your plate. Did I set my next fasting timer? All of these kind of things also lead to reduced stress as well, because higher stress and higher anxiety can come from just feeling like I'm out of control. So bringing in a few things deliberately within your control definitely reduces those levels of stress too.
There was a really cool study that talked about just a 7-minute meditation and how that could decrease blood sugar in type 2 diabetics by up to 30%, right?
Wow.
So just incredible ways, physiology-backed science that says, yeah, we need to really be tapping into this rest and digest component, which leads us to this last piece for how to improve insulin sensitivity is prioritize your sleep, right? So inadequate sleep, it is a chronic issue that we have. Dr. Huberman just did a 6-part series with one of the world's leading sleep specialists. It's like 43 hours long because each one of his podcasts is a day and a half.
Right.
And I'm slogging through it. But big picture, less than 6.5 hours of sleep is called, over a course of 2 or 3 nights in a row, is called sleep deprivation. So we're not talking about Navy SEAL training on the beach sleep deprivation, right? Yeah. We're just talking about life deprivation, kids, dogs, jobs, travel, work, loud neighbors, fireworks, all that stuff, right? So I know 4th of July is coming up. I'm already prepping because our 3 dogs and 3 kids, I'm already like prepping the natural Benadryl that we have for the dogs. Okay. Like I'm like, all right, we're stocked up. We're good. Okay, let's go. So this inadequate sleep component, it only takes a few nights of subpar shut-eye. And this was a study done on men, 6 nights, 4 hours per night. So we're talking a little bit more severe, led to a 40% lower glucose clearance from the bloodstream. Less than 6.5 hours a night for 2 to 3 nights a week, you can see a 30% decrease in glucose clearance.
Wow. Yep.
Right? Yeah. So never mind that. Inadequate sleep is going to promote by activating your sympathetic nervous system again, which is going to be your stress response or your cortisol level. Eventually, it's going to burn out. Yeah. But so prioritizing your sleep is so absolutely important. And we know that the next day, Tommy, your food-related decisions or your fasting-related decisions on poor sleep,
yeah,
so much harder, right?
Yeah, it's reduced inhibitions, it's lower levels of feelings of self-control, it's lower levels of being able to execute discipline, and it's a smaller bucket of willpower that you're going to be able to tap into, and all of those things are finite resources. But when you put on top of it the fact that you're not feeling 100%, and then you're kind of you're chasing after just feeling better or having more energy, which means, hey, let me bring in a little bit of caffeine. What if I brought in some food? Wouldn't I feel a little perkier, have a better day? All of these kind of things you may or may
Mm-hmm.
not, but they're likely to make you feel better in the short term. But at the same time, they're pulling you away from your long term goals. That's problematic. And then they're also releasing more cortisol and mimicking the effects of insulin. So that's also part of that kind of vicious cycle right there, which is definitely problematic. So if we can throw a wrench into one of those variables right there, then we can gain a level of control the next day that's going to help ensure that we make more good decisions rather than some poor decisions, right?
Yeah, 100%. And if we're going to look at, well, some of you are going to be like, well, yeah, I don't know how to make this sleep thing happen. Like I've been trying for a
Sure.
long time. I want to encourage you that I've been in that same boat. Okay.
Yeah, me
Tommy and
too.
I both have Whoops. We have a Fasting for Life team
Yeah,
channel. I think it's what it's called. You can create these groups inside of
yeah.
your Whoop community, which just stabbed me in the eyeball. But it is interesting because the trends are moving in the right direction since I've had it for the last 3 years. It's just been painfully slow, right? So you and I
Yeah,
were having a conversation about morning routines, evening routines, etc., building that
mhm.
stress resiliency, protecting against insulin resistance. Like my dad said growing up, hey, be home before midnight. Nothing good happens after midnight. Well, nothing good happens in the kitchen after 8 p.m. either.
That's true.
Nothing good
Yeah,
happens after 10:30 not going to bed, right? You don't get your first growth hormone spike and then your blood sugar's a mess the next day and the vicious cycle continues. So
mhm.
7 to 8 hours of sleep per night is what we want to shoot for. And if you're like, gosh, I'm 3 hours away from that. Yeah, my sleep debt was about that too, where it's like,
Yeah.
you need 9.5 hours of sleep and I'm getting 6. Great. Okay.
Got
Well,
to
you
start
can,
somewhere though.
you only, exactly. So consistent bedtime routine, avoid screens, stop drinking alcohol, don't eat late, cool, dark room,
Mhm.
don't have a TV in your room, blackout curtains, whatever it is. Tommy, as we wrap up today, the action step is really going to be out of all the stuff we talked about. You got to pick one or two of these things and prioritize them, just like you should sleep or stress response or clean fasting windows or
Yeah.
exercise or intentional food decisions, etc. And it's, you can't build a pyramid from the top down. No, you can't build a what I'm so bad at analogies. You need the foundation first.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You can't
One
build a
nail at a
pyramid
time.
from the
My
top.
goodness. Just land the plane for me. We're done.
You can't build
Take
it top
away.
down, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
no. So, listening to this conversation, like, pick something that resonated with you, or what if anything smacked you in the face, and even if there's really really good reasons why you don't feel like you have it under control right now, you can still take one or two actions today. Like, don't wait. Do something a little bit different. If it's for sleep, then go into tonight with a little bit of a different intention behind it, or if it's for your food choice or for your fasting, whatever it might be, or maybe it's going for that first walk, that after dinner or after lunch. If you moved your eating window to an earlier time, then going for that first walk or extending it by just a few minutes with the deliberate intention of, I want to bring that blood sugar down just a little bit more, and I want to bring that insulin down a little bit more, because one of my problems before was the fact that I was looking at sleep as an obligation rather than an opportunity. And so
Ooh.
I'm going to encourage you to kind of
We need
reframe.
t-shirts that say that.
Right. Yeah, I know. And it just kind of smacked me right now, actually, in real time as we're having this conversation. I was looking at it, sleep, as an obligation rather than an opportunity. Because if you take advantage of good sleep and leverage it, everything else the next day feels so much easier and better and more energetic, and it's easier to string together a lot more wins with a little bit better sleep. So that's absolutely, like, thinking back a few years, that's where I would have started after hearing this conversation. So we definitely want to hear where you're going to start out too.
And that's so interesting. That used to be exercise for me too. After so many years of it being something I enjoyed, it then became just a task. So say it one more time for me so I can ingrain it in my neurons.
Well, I was looking at sleep as an obligation rather than an opportunity. So that might have been exercise or
food choices on your plate.
Food choices, yeah, or your fasting timer, or your stress, or maybe it's stress management for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. So lots of different action steps. I know we say, if you listen to our opening, it's like one action step, right?
Yeah.
So pick one. Now you want to go download the insulin assessment. You want to do your waist rate. You want to grab the blueprint. You want to re-engage. You want to prioritize your sleep. Go download the sleep guide that we have from the website, right? From our resources page, thefastingforlife.com. Join the Facebook community. Take some action that's going to invigorate you, just like Hottie Toddy Tar Heel, that the fun always stopped really early on in the low and slow, eat less, move more, calorie tracking world. Yeah. It never was exciting. It never it never encouraged you to keep going, right? So take an action. Action then creates momentum. Momentum creates results. So Tommy.
Nice.
Great way to land the plane, sir. Thank you. I got caught up in trying to come up with the right cliche or analogy or paraphrasing my way into a corner. So as always, happy fasting. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for the conversation, sir, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.